Today, I feature moments when live TV turned into accidents, something that's always unsettled me, especially growing up relying on television for entertainment. From an actor who stepped onto a rigged platform, laughing off warnings the crew gave him, to a street performer who took juggling machetes onto a live broadcast only for it to end in a horrifying way. I'm your host, Timothy, and let's get into it. It was April 10th, 2017, on a live comedy broadcast stage in Osaka, Japan, where a man who had spent years learning to make people laugh walked onto a platform that nobody had properly tested, and the last sound the studio audience heard from him was not a punchline. Hiroto Nishimura was 28 years old and worked as a stage actor with a regional theater company in Osaka. He had been performing since his early 20s, mostly in comedic ensemble roles. Outside his main work, he ran a small independent comedy collective with 3 friends and had been planning their first full production for months. He had joined the variety program specifically for the appearance fee, which friends said he intended to put toward venue rental costs. Unfortunately, that was the whole reason he was there. He was known on set for almost never refusing a physical bit. Directors who had worked with him described him as a yes person, the one who took the falls, wore the awkward costumes, stayed for the late reshoot. A production assistant who had worked with him on a prior segment told investigators Hiroto had a tendency to wave off safety briefings, not from carelessness exactly, but from a genuine trust in production crews. That morning, a crew member told him directly to test the platform before stepping onto it. Based on what I've read, it's not sure if he acknowledged it or not. What I do know is that the recording stage was an indoor studio facility in central Osaka. The segment was built around a tremor simulation gag, using a motorized platform designed to tilt subtly beneath a contestant while pre-recorded earthquake audio played through the speakers. Investigators later determined the motor had been misaligned during assembly the previous day, causing the platform to tilt at approximately 18 degrees at peak movement, more than 4 times the intended range. A camerawoman named Keiko had noticed a slight shift in the support frame during a pre-show run-through, but assumed it was deliberate. About 40 seconds before recording officially began, the stage manager called for a hold. The floor director acknowledged it, but failed to immediately and clearly relay the stop to the talent area, which would be required in a real production. Hiroto stepped onto the center of the platform, still smiling. The audience built into cheers around him. 2 crew members near the motor housing later said they knew something was wrong, but nobody stopped filming. At this point, I'm looking at what I'm reading and screaming internally. Why would they not stop? The motor engaged. The platform reached its maximum tilt in approximately 1.1 seconds. Hiroto's right foot lost contact with the surface first. His body weight dropped forward over his left knee, and when that foot slid too, there was some reflexive flailing of his arms, but not enough to regain balance. He went down face first. His forehead struck the concrete lip at the platform's front edge, where the rubber safety mat had been cut short during installation, leaving roughly 4 inches of bare concrete exposed. The impact was audible on the studio recording. Hiroto did not move after the impact. A production assistant near the camera bay described a spreading dark stain that reached the platform edge within seconds. Keiko reacted immediately to the fall, but had a brief moment of hesitation as the scene unfolded, filming for approximately 2 to 3 seconds before lowering her camera. 2 cast members rushed onto the platform. One knelt beside Hiroto and checked his airway. A second called emergency services from the stage floor. The control room switched the broadcast to a static card within seconds. Emergency responders arrived in 6 minutes. Hiroto was transported immediately and declared dead before reaching the hospital. The coroner determined cause of death to be severe traumatic brain injury from blunt force impact to the frontal skull. Hiroto's comedy collective held a quiet memorial at their studio the following week and suspended all activity for a month. His family filed a legal claim against the production company, citing the misaligned motor, the unprotected concrete edge, and the failure to halt recording after the stage manager's call. The court ultimately found partial liability, acknowledging that while Hiroto had been verbally advised to test the platform, production safety oversights contributed to the accident, and a settlement was reached rather than a full exoneration of the company. That ruling sits badly with me. Warning someone once and then allowing filming to continue while crew members are already exchanging looks about a malfunctioning motor. That is not an assumption of risk. That is a room full of people who made a choice to keep going. I think this next one is the kind of story where the more you learn about the guy, the harder it hits. A circus performer, first time on a televised stage, and he walked onto that set carrying his own fuel because he thought it gave him more control. It was October 3rd, 2017, inside a broadcast production studio in Manila, Philippines, where a fire act that had been performed hundreds of times without incident was about to find the one condition that made all that experience irrelevant. Renato Dalisay was 34 years old and had worked Manila's small performance circuit for nearly a decade. Outdoor festivals, private events, tourist district showcases. Fellow performers described him as someone who drilled his technique until it was automatic. He had built a specific reputation for fire acts, and the televised talent competition was the largest platform he had ever booked. Reading this, I can't help but think how this is exactly the kind of moment people wait years for. Fire breathing leaves almost no margin for error. A performer holds fuel in the mouth and blows it across a flame so it ignites in the air, not inside. He brought his own fuel. The production's fire safety coordinator had flagged this before rehearsal and directed him to use the stage-supplied compound, which met the venue's specifications. The key variable is the fuel. Stage-grade paraffin burns slowly and predictably, while volatile substitutes can ignite too fast. When that happens, flashback can occur, sending fire back toward the face instead of forming a controlled plume. Renato declined, telling crew his personal blend gave him more consistent flame behavior and that he had used it for years without incident. The coordinator explicitly refused to approve the act with personal fuel, but a producer overruled the hold and cleared the segment to proceed. The schedule was tight, and the segment went forward. I personally think years of nothing going wrong is one of the most dangerous forms of confidence a person can carry. I think it's frustrating in a very specific way, because the system meant to stop this actually did its job and was ignored. The studio floor was acrylic paneled, chosen for its reflective quality under broadcast lighting. Several crew members noted before the segment that performers in earlier slots had struggled for footing on it. The production team did not install temporary mats despite known slipperiness. 4 overhead lighting banks ran at full intensity. Smoke machines fed a thin haze across the lower third of the stage. A fire safety officer stood in the left wing with 2 extinguishers. The nearest seated judge was approximately 15 feet from the performance mark. Renato stepped to center stage, ignited his torch, loaded the fuel, and squared his stance. The preparation appeared routine to everyone watching. With the main broadcast camera locked on him, he angled the torch and expelled the liquid. The flame ignited in a sudden flashback. Instead of a smooth vertical column, a chaotic fireball erupted back toward his face, clearly visible on the live broadcast feed, with uneven tongues of flame licking outward. His cheeks and mouth caught fire almost instantly, and small sparks splashed across the margins of his eyelids and periorbital area. The torch dropped. His knees gave and he went straight to the stage floor. The acrylic surface offered no grip. Crew in the wings had already begun moving before he landed. A fire blanket was placed over him within seconds. 2 extinguishers discharged across the stage as the control room cut the broadcast away from the performance. The fire on his clothing was controlled quickly, but the inhalation damage had already occurred. His breathing was audible from the wing, labored, deteriorating, accompanied by continuous coughing. I find it almost unbearable that people were already moving toward him and still couldn't close the gap in time. A producer on the stage floor called emergency services immediately. Paramedics arrived in under 5 minutes. Renato's airway compromise was severe enough that paramedics needed immediate airway management once they arrived. He was transported to the hospital where acute respiratory failure developed despite intervention. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as acute respiratory failure secondary to severe inhalation burns, with full-thickness contact burns documented across the face, periorbital region, and anterior neck. The production company issued a brief statement. Renato's family held a small service in Manila, attended mostly by performers from the same circuit he had worked for a decade. His personal fuel container was recovered from his kit bag and returned to the family with his other belongings. I feel like there's something especially quiet and heavy about this ending. No spectacle, no extended coverage, just a small circle of people who actually knew him. All right, so this following story genuinely gets under my skin, because it wasn't a stunt, it wasn't a performance, it was a guy just standing on a hill with a microphone, and somehow that was enough. It was March 15th, 2018, and a severe convective system had been tightening over Greater São Paulo since late morning. By early afternoon, the hill where Aldrich Mendes would stand held a view of the whole approaching system, and from inside the broadcast station 4 miles away, that view was the point. Aldrich was 29 years old and had spent 4 years as a field meteorology correspondent for a regional broadcast station in São Paulo. His reputation among colleagues was specific: meticulous with preparation, reckless with exposure. He reviewed radar loops before every assignment, taped his microphone connections personally, and kept a laminated wind speed reference card in his jacket pocket. He was also known for treating safety advisories as negotiable when the story was worth it. 6 months earlier, he had completed an annual lightning safety refresher covering exposure reduction, elevated position avoidance, and minimum crew distance from metal equipment during active lightning. He signed the acknowledgement form. That morning, producers urged an outdoor live segment to maximize viewership during the storm's peak window. Aldrich chose a small hill on the city's outskirts, roughly 20 feet above the surrounding terrain, and by 2:40 p.m. was standing on it holding a metal core microphone. Live cable running across wet grass toward Theo, his cameraman, 30 feet back. It's like watching someone knowingly step into a checklist of hazards. Thunder was cycling every 9 seconds by 2:47 p.m. Wind gusts had reached 35 miles per hour. A single small grounding rod had been set near the broadcast position, but it did not create a safe zone around Aldrich. He was within 4 feet of it, too close for any real protection. He was mid-segment, live on the broadcast feed, when a ground flash struck a chain-link fence 60 feet below at the hill's base, sending lateral current through the saturated soil and nearby wet grass, which reached the live cable running up the hillside. I find it difficult to move through this story without thinking about how many people in that production chain had the authority to pull him off that hill and chose not to. The current entered through the wet cable at the microphone connector. Theo saw the microphone jump violently in Aldrich's grip, a single rigid vibration, before sparks jumped from the cable connector at his feet. The physicality of this moment is what makes it so jarring for me. It's not gradual, not something that escalates, just one instant where everything changes with no chance to react. Muscles in Aldrich's body contracted uncontrollably from the current. His back arched hard, his right arm extended outward at an angle that was not voluntary. He cleared the ground by several inches before dropping onto his left side in the wet grass. His jacket was smoking at the collar and along the right forearm seam. The grip tape on the microphone handle had burned through at both contact points. Theo dropped the camera and ran toward him as the surge and Aldrich's collapse remained visible on the live broadcast for a brief moment before the feed cut. As he reached Aldrich, Theo felt a brief, sharp shock through the camera body from the voltage spike traveling in the cable, which caused his hands to tingle. He managed to drag Aldrich 3 feet before stopping, unable to continue. The burn marks in the grass were irregular, consistent with the chaotic path of a conduction-mediated lightning strike rather than a straight line. His right shoe had partially separated at the sole, consistent with the exit burn at the left heel documented later by the medical examiner. He did not move again. A pedestrian on the road below called emergency services within 30 seconds of the strike. A second bystander joined the call. Paramedics arrived approximately 10 minutes later and initiated resuscitation at the scene. Aldrich was pronounced dead at 3:14 p.m. The medical examiner determined cause of death to be cardiac arrest secondary to an indirect lightning strike conducted through wet equipment and soil. Entry burns were noted at the right hand, exit burns at the left heel. Cardiac tissue showed non-specific signs of electrothermal damage. No blunt trauma injuries were identified. The exposure was classified as conduction-mediated rather than direct strike. The station aired a brief statement that evening. Journalists struck during storm coverage and pulled the broadcast footage from its archive without public explanation. Colleagues left flowers at the hilltop the following morning. Staff were offered counseling sessions quietly, without announcement. I personally think that this wasn't a freak accident. It was a decision made inside an air-conditioned building by people watching the same radar Aldrich tracked for a living, who sent him up a hill anyway. At least with Aldrich, you could look at the storm clouds in the metal microphone and see it coming. However, the next story is a charity fundraiser, a dunk tank, a crowd full of laughing kids. It was June 9th, 2014, on the grounds of a community park in East London, England, where a local television crew was present to film a segment on community fundraising. The fair had drawn several hundred attendees under a flat, overcast sky, The kind of day that photographs gray and forgettable until it doesn't. Vesta Cairn was 25 and enrolled part-time in a theater studies program at a performing arts college in central London. She had been volunteering with the same fundraising collective since she was 19, arriving before setup crews, staying through breakdown, noting what needed improvement for the following year. In the months before the event, she completed a short acrobatics course at a community fitness center, part of a longer effort to add physical performance to a skill set that already included stage movement and improv. When a TV producer announced they will have a segment for this fair, she had not been assigned to the dunk tank. She had put her own name on the list. I get the sense of someone trying to expand what they can do, stepping a little further each time, and it makes the decision feel personal in a way that's hard to detach from. Vesta had a history of vasovagal syncope, which can cause sudden fainting from stress or overstimulation. She disclosed this weeks earlier, and organizers cleared her with a colleague nearby. Despite considering restrictions, they allowed her in the tank due to her experience. No harness was used, the platform was 4 feet high, and the tank held approximately 4 feet of water, and no additional broadcast safety review was conducted despite the presence of live cameras. The tank was positioned on a flat concrete apron near the park's eastern fence. Around it, the environment was relentless, foam balls striking the target plate, the crowd cycling through anticipation and reaction, a loudspeaker from the main stage about 60 yards away running announcements on a loop. The segment was already live on the broadcast feed. Cohen, the TV organizer, was at the base of the platform when he noticed Vesta shift her weight and press one hand flat against the support post beside her seat. He moved closer. A second volunteer was already positioned on the access step to her left. The crowd had peaked. The noise was the loudest it had been all morning. This moment reads to me like the last chance for intervention. A small signal that something might be off, almost lost in everything else happening around it. The countdown from the crowd reached 1. A ball hit the target plate, captured cleanly by the broadcast camera. The platform released, the fall unfolding on the live broadcast as Vesta tilted forward, not backward as the drop should produce, but forward, her torso already without tension before the seat gave way. The colleague on the access step reached for her arm and missed. Cohen later told investigators the motion was unlike a fall, more like a switch being cut than a person losing balance. There was no corrective response from her body. Her head struck the exposed concrete edge beside the tank on the descent. Contact was at the right temple. Multiple witnesses described a single sharp crack that cut through the ambient noise and stopped the crowd within seconds. Her body continued forward and entered the water. Cohen and the second volunteer immediately pulled Vesta from the tank onto the flat concrete apron. Cohen positioned her supine and cleared her airway while the second volunteer initiated chest compressions. She convulsed once, a brief, involuntary contraction, then went still. A bystander near the barrier called emergency services, while several others stood frozen as the nearby monitor that had been relaying the live feed went to a studio segment. Paramedics arrived in approximately 6 minutes. Resuscitation efforts continued at the scene before being discontinued. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as severe blunt cranial trauma from direct impact to the right temporal region against a hard concrete edge. Findings included a basilar skull fracture, acute subdural hemorrhage, and structural damage to the right temporal lobe. No drowning was identified. The water was not a contributing factor. The collective posted a brief statement online 2 days later. Fundraising continued through the remainder of the season with minimal social media coverage and no publicly shared photographs or video from that day. And the broadcaster confirmed that the live segment had been cut immediately and would not be rebroadcast or released. A gathering at her performing arts college drew close friends and a few faculty members. No public ceremony was held beyond that. I have said this on this channel before, but the part that doesn't leave me is the paperwork trail. The disclosure, the review, the monitoring arrangement. Every safeguard that was supposed to be present was present. It still wasn't enough. That is harder to sit with than negligence. It doesn't point anywhere. This next one is the kind of story where the closer you look, the worse it gets. A Cairo street performer who juggled machetes and a live broadcast decided the safety barrier was bad for the shot. It was December 23, 2015, in a paved public square in central Cairo, Egypt. The afternoon sun flat and pale gold. the air carrying exhaust and roasted nuts, and where a man who had spent nearly a decade perfecting his craft bled out on a concrete stage in front of a live crowd in under 2 minutes. Radi Mansour was 31 years old and had worked as a street performer in Cairo since his early 20s, building a quiet but reliable reputation in the tourist corridors near the city's most visited landmarks. He specialized in bladed juggling, knives, cleavers, and most prominently, machetes, and had spent years refining a routine built around precise arc throws and timed catch sequences. I keep thinking how this isn't some reckless beginner. This is someone who practiced every day, which somehow makes what's coming feel worse. Local vendors who watched him regularly described him as obsessively consistent. He ran his full routine every morning before tourists arrived, adjusting spacing and timing until each pass was repeatable to the inch. He had performed at street festivals, private events, and cultural exhibitions across the city. What he had never done was perform under live broadcast conditions. 3 weeks before December 23rd, a regional production crew approached him about a short live segment for a local station's holiday coverage. The arrangement was simple: perform his standard routine, draw a crowd. One detail changed in the final production meeting. The low rope barrier he used to keep bystanders at a safe distance was not removed, but was instead repositioned about 6 feet back and slightly lowered to improve camera sightlines, which slightly reduced the protective space around him. The square that afternoon held roughly 60 tourists and local pedestrians in a loose semicircle around the performance area. A 40-foot stretch of uneven concrete slightly sloped toward a center drain. The surface had been patched several times over the years, and a raised seam ran across the stone roughly 4 feet from where Radi typically planted his left foot during catch sequences. The routine started cleanly with the main broadcast camera fixed on him. Witnesses described the first several passes as controlled and precise. On the 4th sequence, Radi shifted slightly to his right. His left heel caught the concrete seam, a minor slip that displaced him only an inch or two from his normal stance. The machete left his right hand on its upward arc. This small stance change altered the blade's trajectory enough that it came back lower and closer than he expected. Radi extended his left arm to correct. His right hand crossed to intercept. The crew shouted from behind the camera cluster. He did not have time to redirect. I'm literally watching this like it's in slow motion, knowing it's just inches and seconds, deciding everything is honestly terrifying. The blade struck the right side of his neck at the base, just above the clavicle, the moment visible on the live broadcast for several seconds before the feed cut. It opened a deep wound approximately 4 inches across the side of the neck, severing the right external jugular vein and lacerating the right common carotid artery. He dropped straight to the pavement. No stagger, no catch. Blood reached the concrete in volume within seconds and spread across the uneven surface faster than anyone around him could process. It's so direct and clinical, but that almost makes it worse for me because there's no drama, just instant reality. A witness named Samir, standing near the front of the crowd, moved first. He pushed through the bystanders and pressed both hands against the wound. Tourists pulled back, several screaming. The production crew cut the live feed within approximately 20 seconds of the fall. Samir held pressure while someone called for an ambulance. A crew member placed the emergency call. Responders arrived 9 minutes later. He was transported to a regional medical facility and pronounced dead on arrival. The coroner's finding, in plain terms, acute hemorrhagic shock caused by laceration of the right carotid artery and jugular vein. Given the severity and location of the wound, there was no viable intervention window. Death resulted directly from exsanguination. The local station issued a brief line noting a performance accident. No extended coverage followed. Samir gave one account to investigators and declined to speak further. Radi's family held a private funeral attended only by close relatives and a small number of fellow performers. Multiple tourists had recorded portions of the incident on their phones, but most footage remained private or unshared outside immediate circles. The production crew issued no public statement.